Lila Bennett was a woman whose life was measured in silence and shadows. Her only goal was to stay invisible so her terrifying past could never find her again. But on a stormy night, she made a clumsy mistake, a stumble that caused her sleeve to rip in the hands of her boss. The man holding her arm was Han Jae-sung, a mafia boss who ruled the city with an iron fist. Lila didn't know it yet, but that tearing fabric didn't just ruin her uniform. It revealed the brutal scars she had hidden for years, and woke up a sleeping dragon who would burn the world to find out who hurt her. Lila Bennett was a ghost in a glass castle. At 24, she balanced the heavy silver trays of Han Jae-sung's penthouse with the crushing weight of her own secrets. She was quiet, fast, and knew the most important rule of survival: never be seen. Her maid uniform was always perfectly pressed, and she wore long sleeves even in the hottest summer heat to hide the ugly marks on her skin. She didn't want money or power. She just wanted a corner of the world where the Viper, the man who ruined her life, could not find her. That hope was her only shield, but holding on to it was exhausting when she lived in the home of a killer. It was late at night, and the storm outside was raging. Lila was placing a teacup on the dark oak desk, her mind already planning how to exit the room without making eye contact. 3 months ago, Lila Bennett stood in the center of the most expensive living room she had ever seen, trying to stop her hands from shaking. The penthouse was on the top floor of the tallest building in Seoul. The windows were huge, floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the entire city, but the room felt like a fortress. That was exactly why she was here. She didn't want a job, she wanted a hiding place. Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper, walked around Lila slowly. She was a small, stern woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. She looked at Lila's resume, then at her cheap shoes, and finally at her face. "You are American," Mrs. Park said. It wasn't a question. Mr. Han does not usually hire foreigners. He prefers privacy. "I am quiet," Lila said quickly. Her voice was low and steady, even though her heart was pounding against her ribs. "I do not speak Korean very well, so I will not gossip. I just want to work. I can clean anything. I am fast, and I am invisible." Mrs. Park paused. She seemed to like that word. Invisible. "Mr. Han is a very difficult man," Mrs. Park warned, lowering her voice. "He is the head of the Han Syndicate. Dangerous men come here. If you see something, you forget it immediately. If you hear something, you never repeat it. Do you understand?" Lila nodded. She understood dangerous men. She had been running from one for years. "I understand. You start today," Mrs. Park said. She handed Lila a uniform. It was black and white, crisp and new. Lila took it, but her eyes widened in panic. The uniform had short sleeves. She couldn't wear short sleeves. If she did, everyone would see the ugly, jagged scars that twisted down her right arm. They would ask questions. They would know she wasn't just a maid. "Mrs. Park," Lila said, clutching the fabric tight. "Is it okay if I wear a long-sleeved undershirt? I get cold very easily." Mrs. Park frowned but nodded. "As long as it is black. Now, go change." That night, in the small servant's room behind the kitchen, Lila made a list of rules for herself. She looked in the mirror, staring at her own reflection. She looked tired and scared. Rule number 1, never speak unless spoken to. Her voice could not be remembered. Rule number 2, never show skin. The long sleeves must never come up. The scars were a map to her past, and her past was deadly. Rule number 3, never look him in the eye. This was the most important rule. Han Jae-sung was known as the devil of Seoul. People said he could smell fear. If she looked him in the eye, he might see the terror living inside her. He might see that she wasn't just a maid, but a runaway hiding from a monster even worse than him. Lila took a deep breath and smoothed down her apron. She was safe here, as long as she remained a ghost. She opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, ready to disappear. The warehouse smelled like rust and old seawater. It was barely dawn, and the fog from the Han River curled around the metal beams like a ghost. Han Jae-sung stood perfectly still, his expensive leather shoes resting on the dirty concrete floor. He checked his watch. He had a board meeting at 9, and he didn't like to be late. In front of him, a man was on his knees. It was Mr. Choi, one of his most trusted lieutenants. Choi was crying, his face wet with tears and snot. He had been selling secrets to a rival gang for months. "Please, boss," Choi begged, his voice shaking. "I have a family. I needed the money." Jae-sung didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He looked bored. He adjusted his cufflinks, the silver glinting in the dim light. "Everyone has a family, Choi," Jae-sung said. His voice was soft, like velvet wrapped around a knife. "And everyone needs money. But not everyone betrays me." He nodded once to his bodyguard. There was a single, loud bang. Choi slumped forward. Jae-sung didn't flinch. He didn't even look down. He simply turned around and walked out into the gray morning light, leaving the body for the cleaners. He was the devil of Seoul, and devils didn't feel guilty. By evening, the city was drowning in rain. Jae-sung returned to his penthouse, the silence of the apartment hitting him like a wall. He liked the quiet. It was the only thing that didn't want something from him. He took off his suit jacket, tossing it onto a leather chair. His shirt was crisp and white, untouched by the blood of the morning. He walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. That was when he saw her. The new maid was standing by the counter, polishing a silver tray. She froze when he entered, like a deer caught in headlights. She was small, and she wore a long-sleeved black shirt under her uniform, even though the apartment was warm. "Water," Jae-sung said. One word. The maid scrambled to get a glass. She moved fast, keeping her head down. As she poured the water from a pitcher, the glass chattered against the rim. Clink. 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 Jae-sung narrowed his eyes. He watched her hands. They were trembling violently. Not just a little shake, but a deep, uncontrollable shiver. She placed the glass on the island counter and slid it toward him, stepping back quickly as if he were made of fire. She stared at her own shoes, refusing to look up. Jae-sung took a sip, his eyes never leaving her. He was used to people being scared of him. Men feared his power, women feared his coldness. But this was different. This girl looked like she expected him to strike her just for breathing. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lila," she whispered. Her voice was barely a sound. "You are shaking, Lila," he observed. I am just cold, sir," she lied. Jae-sung didn't believe her. The room was 70 degrees. He watched her retreat into the shadows of the pantry, clutching her arms tight against her chest. For the first time all day, he felt something other than boredom. He was curious. What kind of monster had she met to make her tremble like that? And why did she look like she was waiting for a blow that hadn't come yet? The penthouse was silent, except for the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick. Tock. Tick. It was 3 a.m. Han Jae-sung couldn't sleep. He never slept well. When he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the men he had killed. He saw Mr. Choi on his knees. So, he sat in his living room, staring at a glass of whiskey he didn't drink, listening to the rain hit the windows. Then, a sound cut through the quiet. It wasn't the wind. It was a scream. Jae-sung stood up instantly. His body went tense, ready for a fight. He thought an assassin had broken in. He moved silently across the expensive rug, his hand reaching for the gun he kept taped under the coffee table. But the scream came again, and this time, he heard words. "No. No, please. Stop." It was a woman's voice. It was coming from the back of the apartment, near the kitchen. "Lila." Jae-sung lowered the gun. He walked down the long, dark hallway toward the servants' quarters. The screaming didn't stop. It wasn't a normal scream. It sounded like someone was being hurt right now. It was raw and terrified, full of pain. Don't touch me. Get away. Jisung stopped in front of her door. It was closed. He could hear her thrashing around on the small bed. She was fighting something in her sleep. He reached out. His hand hovered over the cold brass doorknob. He should open it. He should wake her up and tell her to be quiet. Servants weren't allowed to scream in the middle of the night. They were supposed to be invisible. But he didn't turn the knob. Through the wood, he heard the screaming turn into sobbing. It was a low, broken sound. It burns, it burns. She whimpered. Jisung froze. It burns. He knew that sound. He had heard it before. He had heard it in his own room, when he woke up sweating and shaking from nightmares about his father. He knew what it was like to be trapped in a memory that wouldn't let you go. Lila wasn't just a nervous maid. She was haunted. He looked at his own hand. It was steady now, but inside, he felt a strange echo. He was the monster in the dark for everyone else, but this girl, she had her own monsters. And they were chasing her even when she was asleep. Jisung pulled his hand back. He didn't open the door. He didn't wake her. He let her keep her secrets for one more night. But as he walked back to the lonely living room, the silence felt heavier than before. He wasn't the only one in this house living in hell. The sound of tearing fabric was louder than the thunder outside. Lila froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her arm. The black sleeve of her uniform was ripped from the shoulder to the elbow. The cool air of the office hit her skin, but that wasn't what made her shiver. It was the scars. They were ugly, jagged lines that twisted down her arm like old tree roots. Some were burns, pink and shiny. Others were brands, symbols burned into her flesh a long time ago. She had hidden them for years. She wore long sleeves in the summer. She changed in the dark. But now, under the bright lights of Han Jisung's office, they were exposed. Jisung was still holding her wrist. His grip was tight, but his hand wasn't moving. He was staring at her arm. His eyes, usually cold and empty, were wide with shock. He didn't look like the devil of soul right now. He looked horrified. Lila, he whispered. His voice was rough. Lila yanked her arm back. She covered the scars with her other hand, hunching her shoulders. I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the uniform. I'll fix it. Who did this? Jisung asked. He didn't hear her apology. He took a step toward her. The shock in his eyes was turning into something else. Anger. Lila backed away until she hit the edge of the heavy oak desk. It was an accident. A long time ago. It doesn't matter. It matters, Jisung said. He pointed a finger at the specific mark near her elbow, a twisted snake shape. That mark. I know that mark. Lila's blood went cold. He knew. If he knew the mark, he knew who she was running from. He knew she was dangerous to be around. I resign, she blurted out. She turned and ran toward the heavy double doors. I quit. I'm leaving right now. She reached for the handle, but a hand slammed against the wood next to her head, holding the door shut. Jisung was faster than her. He loomed over her, blocking her escape. He didn't touch her, but his presence filled the space. Get out of my way, Lila pleaded, tears stinging her eyes. Please. I just want to disappear. You can't, Jisung said. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was deadly serious. You think you can just walk out onto the street with that brand on your arm? Do you know who is looking for you? I know. Lila shouted. That's why I have to run. If you run, they will find you, Jisung said. He leaned closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers. They will find you at the train station. They will find you at the airport. You won't make it past the city limits. Lila trembled. Then what do you want from me? Jisung locked the door with a loud click. He turned back to her, his face hard but his eyes protecting her. I want you to stay alive, he said low and grim. You leave this house, you die. As long as you are in here, you are mine to protect. And no one touches what is mine. Han Jisung didn't let Lila leave. He guided her to the leather sofa in the corner of his office. He didn't sit behind his desk like a boss. He sat on the coffee table in front of her, close enough to hear her whisper, but far enough away so she wouldn't feel trapped. Tell me, he said. His voice was quiet. Start from the beginning. Lila pulled her torn sleeve together, trying to hide the ugly marks. She stared at the floor. My father was a gambler. He owed a lot of money to bad people. When he died, the debt didn't die with him. It came to me. Jisung's jaw tightened. They made you pay it? I couldn't pay it, Lila said, a tear sliding down her cheek. So they took me instead. I was 18. They took my passport. They took my name. For 3 years, I wasn't Lila. I was just property. The room was heavy with silence. Jisung looked at the scars again. They weren't just random injuries. They were a message. Who did this to you? He asked. Lila took a shaky breath. They call themselves the Viper Syndicate. Jisung froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The Viper? Yes, Lila whispered. The leader, he liked to mark things that belonged to him. When I tried to run away the first time, he caught me. He used a hot iron. He said, if you want to leave, take my name with you. That's what these are. His name. Jisung stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. His mind was racing. For 5 years, he had been hunting the Viper. He had sent his men to Busan, to Daegu, to the borders. He thought the Viper was a ghost operating from the shadows of the south. Where were you kept? Jisung asked, not turning around. Here, Lila said softly. Jisung spun around. What? In Seoul, Lila said. In the basement of the Golden Dragon Club. It's only 10 blocks from here. Jisung felt like he had been punched in the stomach. The Golden Dragon. He drove past that club every day. He had even done business with the owner. He isn't in Busan, Jisung realized, his voice hollow. He's been right under my nose. He's been watching me. Lila looked up, her eyes wide with fear. He knows everything, Han. He knows who enters the city and who leaves. That's why I couldn't run. He has eyes everywhere. Jisung looked at the terrified woman on his sofa. He had been fighting a war with a ghost, while the real enemy was sitting at his dinner table. The Viper wasn't just a rival, he was a neighbor. He walked back to Lila and knelt down. He gently took her hand away from the torn sleeve. He didn't look at the scars with disgust anymore. He looked at them with fury. You are not his property, Jisung said, his voice low and dangerous. Not anymore. He made a mistake coming this close to me. And he made a bigger mistake touching you. You are not going back to that room, Jisung said. His voice left no room for argument. He didn't wait for Lila to pack. He simply ordered Mrs. Park to move Lila's few belongings, a toothbrush, a comb, and a worn-out book, to the east wing. This part of the penthouse was usually reserved for visiting diplomats or business partners. Now, it belonged to the maid. Lila stood in the center of the guest suite. It was bigger than the entire apartment she had grown up in. The bed was covered in white silk, and the windows looked out over the glittering Han River. She felt small and dirty standing on the plush carpet in her torn uniform. She hugged her arms, trying to hide the scars that were now exposed to the cool air. Take a shower, Jisung told her, pointing to the marble bathroom. Burn the uniform. You won't be wearing it again. An hour later, a man in a gray suit arrived. He wasn't a normal doctor, he was Jisung's personal physician, a man paid to keep secrets. He examined Lila's arm in the bright light of the suite sitting room. He didn't ask who hurt her. He only touched the jagged, raised skin with gentle fingers. The nerve damage is deep, the doctor said quietly to Jisung. The tissue is tight. That is why she is in constant pain. She needs daily treatment and a special ointment to soften the skin. Jisung nodded, his face grim. He took the jar of ointment from the doctor and dismissed him. When the door clicked shut, the room fell silent again. Lila sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, wearing a soft oversized robe Jisung had given her. She looked at the jar in his hand. I can do it myself, she whispered, reaching out. Heavy, Jisung said. He didn't give her the jar. Instead, he sat down next to her. He reached out and took her hand. Lila flinched. Her body remembered pain before it remembered kindness. She tried to pull away, expecting a grip that would bruise. Stop, Jisung said softly. He didn't let go, but he didn't squeeze. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. I am not him, Lila. I will never be him. Lila stopped fighting. She let her breath out in a shaky sigh. Slowly, Jisung pushed the sleeve of her robe up to her shoulder. The ugly, twisted scars were there, pink and angry against her dark skin. Jisung dipped his fingers into the cool, white cream. He began to rub it into the worst scar, the brand of the snake. His touch was feather-light. He traced the lines of her pain with a focus that made her heart race. Does it hurt? He asked, his eyes still on her arm. Always, Lila admitted. It feels like fire. Then we will put out the fire, Jisung promised. He looked up, and for a moment, his dark eyes locked with hers. There was no pity in his face, only a fierce, burning promise. In that quiet room, with the smell of medicine and rain, the line between master and servant vanished. He wasn't her boss anymore. He was the man healing her wings so she wouldn't have to fly away. For 3 days, the penthouse felt like a fortress. Lila stayed in the guest suite, wearing soft clothes instead of her uniform. The pain in her arm was fading, thanks to the medicine, and for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the thick glass windows and the armed guards downstairs could keep the monsters away. But monsters don't need to break down doors to get inside. Sometimes, they just send a package. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the intercom for a guest, it was the service bell. Mrs. Park walked to the heavy front door and opened it. A courier in a blue uniform handed her a square box wrapped in brown paper. For Mr. Han, the courier said, tipping his cap. Urgent delivery. Han was in the living room, reading a file. He looked up as Mrs. Park placed the box on the coffee table. I didn't order anything, Han said, frowning. He stood up and walked over. There was no return address. There was no stamp. It had been hand-delivered. Lila walked out of her room, curious. What is it? Stay back, Han ordered sharply. His instincts were screaming at him. He took a small knife from his pocket and sliced the tape. He opened the cardboard flap slowly. Inside, there was a layer of tissue paper. He pulled it back. The room went dead silent. Lila gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She stumbled back until she hit the wall. Inside the box was a doll. It was an expensive porcelain doll with pale skin and long black hair. But someone had changed its clothes. The doll was wearing a tiny, hand-stitched maid's uniform. It was an exact copy of the one Lila used to wear. But the uniform was ruined. Thick, wet red paint was splattered all over the doll's chest and dress. It looked like fresh blood. The doll's right arm had been broken off at the elbow, leaving a jagged, red stump. Resting on top of the doll was a small card. It had a symbol drawn in black ink, a coiled snake. The viper, Lila whispered, her voice trembling so hard she could barely speak. He knows. He knows I am here. Han stared at the box. His face turned into a mask of stone. The Viper wasn't just sending a threat, he was sending a message. He was telling Han, I know where you live. I know who you are hiding. And I can touch her whenever I want. Mrs. Park, Han said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Take Lila to the safe room. Now. Han, Lila cried, tears streaming down her face. He's going to kill us. Han slammed the box shut. He turned to face her, and his eyes were burning with a cold, dark fire. He made a mistake, Han said. He thinks this is a game. He thinks he can scare me with toys. He looked at the closed box, then at the city skyline outside. He just declared war. And I am going to finish it. Stay here. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Han Jae-sung checked the clip of his handgun one last time. He looked like a soldier going to war, dressed in tactical black instead of his usual suit. He touched Lila's cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin. I'm going to end this tonight, Lila. When I come back, he will be gone. Lila nodded, trying to be brave. Be careful. Jae-sung left with 6 of his best men. The heavy steel door clicked shut, locking Lila inside the penthouse with 4 guards posted in the hallway. The silence returned, but this time it felt like the calm before a hurricane. An hour passed. Lila sat in the living room, clutching a pillow. The rain hammered against the glass. Then, the lights flickered. Click. The entire apartment plunged into darkness. Stay down, Miss Lila, one of the guards shouted from the hallway. Lila dropped to the floor behind the sofa. She heard the guards shouting, then the sound of a struggle. But there were no gunshots. Just the sickening sound of heavy blows and bodies hitting the floor. Then, silence. The front door beeped. Someone had the code. The door swung open slowly. A tall, thin man walked in. He wore a white suit that glowed in the dim light of the city outside. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a snake in human skin. It was the Viper. He stepped over the unconscious body of Jae-sung's head of security. Good help is so hard to find these days, he said, his voice smooth and cold. But money buys everyone eventually. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. He had paid them off. Jae-sung's fortress had fallen from the inside. Come out, little mouse, the Viper called out. I know you're here. You can't hide from your owner. Lila stood up slowly. She wasn't going to cower behind a sofa. Not anymore. The Viper smiled. It was a terrifying, dead smile. There she is. You look expensive now. Did he fix you? He walked toward her, pulling a small, curved knife from his pocket. I think I need to mark you again. Just so he knows you're mine. He lunged. Old Lila would have frozen. Old Lila would have screamed. But Lila heard Jae-sung's voice in her head, don't pull away. Step in. Use his weight. As the Viper grabbed for her arm, Lila didn't pull back. She stepped forward, slamming her heel down onto the arch of his foot. The Viper gasped in surprise. Before he could recover, Lila drove her palm hard into his nose, just like Jae-sung had shown her. Crack. The Viper stumbled back, dropping the knife. Blood poured from his nose. He looked shocked. The mouse had bitten back. You little, he snarled, lunging again. Lila grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the table and swung it with all her strength. It smashed against his shoulder, sending him crashing into the wall. She didn't wait to see if he got up. She turned and ran for the safe room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had bought herself seconds, but she knew it wasn't over. She just had to survive until the wolf came home. Lila backed into the corner of the kitchen. She held a sharp, jagged piece of the broken crystal vase in her hand. Her chest was heaving, but she didn't look away. The Viper wiped the blood from his nose. He laughed, a wet, ugly sound that made Lila's skin crawl. You have spirit, he spat, stepping over the broken glass on the floor. I'm going to enjoy breaking it again. He raised his knife. Lila tightened her grip on the shard. She wasn't going to scream. She was going to fight. Suddenly, the front door of the penthouse didn't just open. It exploded inward. Han Ji-sung was there. He wasn't the cold businessman in a suit anymore. He was a storm. He was soaking wet from the rain, his black tactical gear dripping on the floor. He saw the Viper. He saw Lila backed into the corner. And then he moved faster than Lila had ever seen a human move. The Viper spun around, his eyes going wide. Han, wait. There was no waiting. There were no words. Ji-sung slammed into him like a freight train. The two men crashed into the heavy marble island. The sound of bone cracking echoed through the room. The Viper tried to stab him, slashing wildly with his knife, but Ji-sung didn't even flinch. He caught the Viper's wrist in midair and twisted it until it snapped with a sickening pop. The Viper screamed and dropped the knife. Ji-sung didn't stop. He punched him, once, twice, 3 times. Each blow was heavy with 5 years of anger. This was for the scars on Lila's arm. This was for the fear in her eyes. This was for every time she had woken up screaming in the night. You touched her, Ji-sung growled. It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence. He grabbed the Viper by the throat and threw him through the glass partition of the living room. The man landed in a heap of shattered shards. He groaned, trying to crawl away, coughing up blood. Ji-sung walked over. He didn't rush. He picked the Viper up by the lapels of his white suit and dragged him to the open balcony doors. The wind and rain held into the room, wild and cold. Please, the Viper choked out, his legs dangling over the edge of the railing. I can pay you. I can give you the territory. Anything. Ji-sung looked him in the eye. His face was like stone. You have nothing I want. He let go. The scream faded into the dark, stormy night, followed seconds later by a distant, final thud on the pavement far below. Silence rushed back into the room. The wind blew the curtains wildly. Ji-sung stood there for a moment, his hands shaking from the adrenaline. He took a deep breath, trying to push the monster back inside him. He turned around slowly, terrified of what he would find. He expected to see Lila crying in a ball on the floor. He expected to see the broken girl he had met months ago. But Lila wasn't crying. She was standing in the middle of the wrecked kitchen. Her hair was messy, and her uniform was torn, but her head was high. She still held the piece of glass in her hand, her knuckles white. She looked at the empty balcony, then at Ji-sung. She dropped the glass shard. It clattered loudly on the floor. Is he gone? She asked. Her voice didn't shake. It was strong. Ji-sung walked over to her. He didn't touch her like she was fragile glass anymore. He put his hands on her shoulders, feeling the strength in them. He looked at her face and saw a survivor, not a victim. He is gone, Ji-sung said firmly. He will never hurt you again. Lila looked at her arm. The scars were still there, but the man who made them was history. She looked up at Ji-sung and nodded slowly. Good, she said. She stepped into his arms, not because she needed saving, but because she belonged there. Ji-sung held her tight, realizing that he hadn't just saved her. She had saved herself, too.